This is Karl Moore talking management for the Globe and Mail. Today I'm delighted to have Professor Michael Porter, who's a university professor at Harvard here and just one of the biggest names in strategy around the world, to join us today. So good afternoon, Michael. And let me start by offering congratulations. You're on a doctorate from the Desautels School here at McGill University.
I was very delighted to get the invitation, and it's been a great day.
Good. We're in the midst of the worst recession in our lifetime, Mike. And
We
we look
sure
at that and say, what does this mean from a viewpoint of strategy?
Well, I think we got into this recession in a very curious way, and that is that we had really a failure in what you would normally think is a relatively small part of our economy, which is basically residential mortgages. And because of a whole lot of failures that are coming out, and we all understand, and partly due to, I think, some failures in finance theory and thinking, we ended up with this, catastrophic problem in mortgages, which is so big and affected the creditworthiness of banks and financial institutions to such a degree that it's then kind of spread in concentric circles, and now it's kind of infected credit cards because people, couldn't pay their credit cards because they were behind on their mortgage, and then it affected the housing sector and other sectors. The real economy was actually pretty healthy going into this, but it really got poisoned by this relatively new. But it exposed something much deeper, which is the unsustainable nature of the way the world economy was growing. So we had this bizarre situation where, and I wish I had the chart I could show you, the U.S. was bumping along at consumption as a percentage of GDP at 62%, 63%. It had gone that way for 30 years. And then all of a sudden, starting about the mid-90s, it shot up to about 72 or 73%. And clearly that was a credit-fueled consumption boom in the U.S. People were, credit was free and people were just borrowing and spending. The economy pretty much boomed, and a lot of the growth was really passed to China and Taiwan and all these other countries that became more and more dependent on exports to the U.S. And their local economies and their local consumption was, actually going down as a percentage of their GDP. So if it were just the mortgage problem and we could restructure the mortgages and kind of, sort that through, I think that would happen relatively quickly. In fact, it's already, gone quite far. But unfortunately, we have to kind of realign the intergalactic planetary forces in the world economy, and the U.S. can't pull everybody else along, and China has to readjust to not being totally dependent on exports to the U.S. and all of that is proving to be complicated and difficult. I believe, as of today, which is late May of 2009, that we are actually growing the economy in the U.S. again. It may be a false peak. It may be just a kind of an inventory restocking kind of a thing, but we are definitely growing. I think that's undistinguished. I mean, I have lots of access to companies and information. So I think we're starting to work our way through, but it's going to take many years to digest this consumption boom, this inability, this lack of savings, the household balance sheet needs to be repaired, and so I think I agree with those who think that we're going to have a relatively slow growing period for some years to come as we close all those retail stores that we don't really need, and as we don't buy those cars that we don't need quite as often as we've been buying them in the past.
So from a viewpoint of how you do strategy, it won't change, just you've got to assume lower growth.
You've got to assume lower growth. I think strategy becomes more important in this kind of an environment. I think in a more benign environment where there's more growth, you're trying a lot of stuff and serving too many segments and not being really disciplined, you get away with it. You can kind of roll along. I think in a time like this, strategy becomes really important to really decide where it is that you can be distinctive, where you can offer unique value. When you're cutting any organization back, the first rule is you cut to a strategy. You don't cut across the board. And, it's one of the most easy tests that you can apply to any organization at a time like this. You can ask, how are they cutting? And that tells you an awful lot about the clarity of thinking in management and really the future prospects of the organization. This is this time that we're going through also is a time when a lot of false signals are going out. So, the customers that are in the marketplace today buying stuff know that there's very few customers, and they're asking for things and they're demanding things, and they're kind of bottom fishing and so forth. And if you adapt your whole business to that world, you're going to end up, not doing very well in the long run. So you've got to be pragmatic, but you've got to not get, a false view of the future. You've got to understand that we are in a sharp contraction. But I think first and foremost, a company has to really re-up on its strategy, and if it hasn't been very clear about that, this is the time that becomes most important.
With President Obama's move in terms of a huge deficit, rescuing the auto industry, do we see a fundamental shift in American capitalism to much more of a government involvement than we've seen in the last 30 or 40 years?
I think we're going to see definitely more government involvement. I think the auto industry case is, I think, a transient case where for a variety of political reasons, that industry had to be propped up, and I'm not proud of it. We've been hassling the Europeans about this for many, many years in our self-congratulatory way as Americans and saying we don't do this stuff. Well, we did it for the same reasons that Europeans do, that it's politically painful to have, too many people, lose their jobs, particularly people that are very closely tied to the party that has now won the presidency. So I think that's a temporary thing. I think what we hopefully will see is a much more sort of skeptical and sound regulatory environment in which competition can take place. So, for example, we let our antitrust policy just kind of out the window, and it's emblematic that Neelie Kroes in Europe actually took on Intel. I mean, again, think of that: Europeans, cozy cartels. That's their heritage. They took on Intel, and America just punted. And it's been anything goes in America in mergers and in sort of dominating markets. So I think we need stricter antitrust. I think we need a much more stringent financial regulatory regime. What I worry about most is not that we'll have a really fundamental realignment in terms of our system, but that the process of regulation will become too expensive and too intrusive and too inefficient. Not because regulation is bad, but because of the way we're doing it. And America already has excessive complexity in our tax code, in our regulatory and human resource system, and that's what worries me, is that this period will actually make that problem worse. And I see that as one of the great competitive challenges of the U.S. Just the complexity of doing business in the U.S. has gotten really excessive. So the wonderful thing about the Obama administration is they actually are open to ideas. There's a incredible dialogue going on, and I don't agree with a lot of them, and I wish there were more business savvy people in the administration. I definitely see an anti-business drift in trade policy and in a variety of other areas. But at this point, I still trust this president and some of the people around him for being intelligent and thoughtful and learning, and that I think is an optimistic, very optimistic. I have no doubt that taxes are going to go up, and that there'll be more. The business will go through a period of rougher sledding, but the checks and balances in the American system are pretty strong, and I think the president is a very intelligent person, so that is a positive sign.
This has been Karl Moore talking management for the Globe and Mail with Professor Michael Porter, University professor at Harvard, and McGill's latest honorary doctorate. So thanks again for your time, Michael.
Pleasure.